We are live streaming this, and we're also recording it. So I give the announcement that if you are speaking, to please move to a microphone and talk into the microphone. Make sure your microphone's on. Those of you in the back row, if you want to make a comment, just come up to the table to speak into one of the microphones, so everyone can hear you, because there are also people on the phone, I believe. So. To kick off the meeting, I will do welcome and introduction. So welcome, this is our sixth or seventh meeting of our Volkswagen group. So we appreciate everyone's interest. We kept hearing from people that couldn't make it, so we were a little worried we wouldn't have very many people here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. So it's wonderful to see you all. So we'll just go around and do introductions. I'm Kira Moore. I'm with the Division of Environmental Quality here with the department. Let's go this way.
I'm Emily Wilbur, and I'm also with the AIR program.
Sorry.
I'm Stacy Allen. I'm also with the AIR program.
Shelley Reimer, AIR program.
Mark Leith with the AIR program.
Ted Helmer, National Park Service.
Paul Brugman. Paul Brugman, Commons Incorporated.
Vernon Ring, Jasper Schools.
Andy Pop, Division of Energy.
Jane Hines, Columbia Water and Light.
Dick Wiles, representing Waste Management.
I'm Deborah Clank with the Missouri Department of Education. I oversee the Student Transportation Program.
Jay Hoskins, Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District.
Jason Peter in Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District.
Molly Freebeard, Showing Solar.
Please come to the mic.
Dan, do you have a portable one so we can take around the back row? Might be a little easier for them.
Molly Freebairn, Show Me Solar.
Diane Matthews, Department of Natural Resources Budget Program. Lisa Stucken, Department of Natural Resources Budget Program.
Joe Killian, state employee but not representing my state agency, citizen.
Keith Anderson, Lily Pad EV.
Larry Kinder, Lily Pad EV.
Cassie Growing, Winter Consulting.
Stan Perkins, OA Fleet Management.
Jesse Rollins, Missouri Division of Energy.
Joe Wright, Central States Bus.
Mark Porth, CHS.
Brooks Kelly, Feral Gas Propane.
John Fling with Feral Gas Propane.
Brad Spreck, Feral Gas Propane.
Jim Rushing, Feral Gas Propane.
Derek Poe, AmeriGas Propane.
Luke Fitzpatrick, MFA Oil Company.
Emily Weir, Green Lots.
I'm used to that. Steve Aaron's, Missouri Propane Education and Research Council.
Okay. Jason Dake, Orange EV.
Pat Justice, Ameren, Missouri.
Andy Knott, Sierra Club.
Connie Ford, Missouri Public Utility Alliance.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Forgot you too. So did I started.
Darcy Bybee, AIR program. I forgot about it too. So.
I was ready to jump to the phone. Sorry about that. Started to my right, not to my left. Anyone on the phone, introduce yourself, please.
Yes, this is Eric Holder with City of Independence Power and Light Department.
Wendy Marine with Kansas City Power and Light.
Jeff Clark with NGV America.
This is Jerry Schechter, City of Kansas City, Missouri.
Kelly Turner,
Liz
City
Hobart.
Utilities of Springfield.
Liz Hobart. Katerina. Oh.
Okay, I got Liz Hobart.
Katerina. Allison Wirtz, KEW Grant Services.
Brian Ross, Missouri Department of Transportation.
Mona Menezes, City of Branson, and Chris Bohin, Alderman, City of Branson.
Sally Gilbert, Kansas City.
Would muting that?
Devin Hardley, St. Louis, please.
Katerina Mikalova and Jen Titus, St. Louis Glenburg Airport.
So anyone on the phone is watching online. That's probably the feedback we're hearing.
David Grimes online here. I finally got online. We're having a little computer problem.
Okay. But it, yeah, it sounds like he is watching the broadcast.
Yeah, I'm trying. As soon as we get back online, I will.
Okay. Okay, those on the phone, if you're also watching online and listening online, if you mute, either listen online and not the phone, or mute online and listen to the phone, because we're getting feedback if you're trying to listen to both the phone and the computer, I think is what I'm getting is the problem. Okay. So that must have done it. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to the crew that did all the work. So we're going to go through the agenda, give you a brief presentation, and then open it up for comments and discussion. So, next. Oh, next.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Before we go into the presentation, I thought I would just kind of go over the web page. Our lovely web page has been updated, and this is where you can find our plan. And if you haven't had a chance to take a look at what we've got here, I would encourage you to go out there. Just real quickly, for those who haven't had a chance to peruse our web page, I thought I'd just go through just kind of step by step. If you scroll down to the bottom, well, at the top, you can see the information about the meeting that we're having right now. So scroll down to the bottom, you can see there's 4 boxes here. Before there were 6, now we have 4. The first box here is read the plan. This is where you can find a copy of the plan, and hopefully you've been able to check it out. And if not, we're going to be discussing it today, so don't worry about that. More importantly, when you're ready to submit comments, scroll down to the bottom, and there are 2 links here, and they will take you to a SurveyMonkey survey, and that is how we're collecting the comments. There are 2 different links because one is for the BMP and one is for the guidelines, and if you click on them, you can submit your comments that way. We're collecting it this way because it's a lot easier for us to sort through the comments. And today, if you do have comments or if you have questions, feel free to ask them at any time. But we do ask and encourage you to submit your comments online so that we'll be able to absorb those comments and make sure we understand what your comments are saying. And if you go back to the main page, you'll see there's the stand form box is the same. If you haven't been receiving updates and you would like to receive updates, you can click on this box here and it'll take you to a page where you can enter your name. I'll go ahead and do it. You can enter your name and subscribe to the email list. So that should, it took me to a different page. Let me go back. There we go. And if you click on the Learn More box here, it has the same information that we did have before about the background, but if you scroll down, you can see that we've added some accordions down here. And before, we had all of our meeting information on a separate tab, and now all of that stuff is located here. So if you're looking for past presentations or meeting agendas or attendance sheets, you can click on the accordion, and it'll show you all the information that we had listed before on this one page. Kind of condenses it down and it is easy to find. All the comments that we've received to date are also located here for you to read. Let's see here. Go back to the main page. You'll see that we still have the apply for funding box, and if you try clicking on that, it is still inactive. We are currently working on developing a fillable PDF as an application, and we will make that application available at this tab or at this box right here when we have it ready. And as an example, what I have here is a PDF of the application that we used for the 2017 DERA school bus replacement program. And kind of just to show you the starting point that we are planning to use. You can see that it just has regular information like the applicant's name and an address and so forth, information about the project. So it's kind of a straightforward application, and like I said, this is kind of what we're going to use as our starting point, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. And that information will be available on the Apply for Funding tab. We are also working on creating a space online to so that people can come and check on the status of their application. And hopefully you'll see in the future another one of these boxes, and you can be able to go there to see what applications we've been receiving and what where they are in the process, and also find out information about complete projects, such as the actual NOx emission reductions that each project receives as required by the federal consent decree. And that's really all I wanted to point out. I just wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to see where we're going. And the information that we are collecting today will go under this box here, so that you can, if you want to see how you want to come back and review the meeting, you can come to this page right here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy Allen, who's going to walk us through the beneficiary mitigation plan.
All right, everybody, thanks for joining us in Jeff City today. Again, my name is Stacy Allen. I'm going to be going through the draft beneficiary mitigation plan, which is one of the 2 documents that are on our webpage right now and are open for comment. This document is required by the trust, so we are trying to meet all the requirements. And our presentation today is going to go over both of those draft documents. The comment period is open for both until Friday, May 4th of this year. And like Emily mentioned, we are intending to collect all of the comments through that SurveyMonkey. You can type in an actual long format comment box if you like, but if it's easier for you to upload a Word document or a PDF document, you can do that as well and provide us any supplemental information that way. So our draft plan includes the 4 elements required by the consent decree. I'll go into detail on all 4 of those. And our draft implementation guidelines, it goes into a lot of detail. So we've got the selection process, how we're targeting different areas. We're going to talk about timing, cost share, and some contingency plans. I'm going to focus on the beneficiary mitigation plan, and some of my coworkers here are going to do a great job on the implementation guidelines. So our draft documents, just to highlight the differences between them. So the mitigation plan on the left is our high-level vision and goals. It talks about the award categories that Missouri has chosen to fund and what funding levels we anticipate at this point in the game. We've got 4 elements that are required by the trust, and this document must go through a public input process that is required by the consent decree. On the right-hand side, you're going to see the implementation guidelines. This is something Missouri decided to come up with. It's not required by the trust, but it has a lot of the details that our stakeholders, through these meetings we've had since October of last year, were really wanting us to give them a better idea of, and we collected a lot of great information from our surveys and comments. So we decided to put together guidelines documents that talk about the selection process, how we're going to choose projects to fund, the timing of those projects, target areas of the state, our cost share and contingency plans for moving money around. And then this document as well, we are going through a public input process on the guidelines. It's not required by the consent decree, but we definitely feel that transparency in this document as well is very necessary. When we do finalize, these documents are in draft format. When we do finalize both documents, the beneficiary mitigation plan does go to the trustee. The trustee that's managing the funds is Wilmington Trust out of Delaware, and they will be the ones who will hold on to this plan. We cannot request funds until they've had the plan for a certain amount of days. So we're in the process right now with these 2 draft documents, and now I'm going to jump right into the beneficiary mitigation plan. And I'm going to list off, this is something that was in a previous presentation we did. The consent decree outlines 4 things that have to be in our plan. It has to talk about our overall goals, number 1, and number 2, what award categories we plan to fund and the funding levels. Number 3, considering benefits for areas that bear a disproportionate air pollution burden. And number 4 are our estimated emission reductions. So these are the 4 items you're going to see came from our surveys, comments we received, and those numbers I'm going to keep highlighting. These 4 things are in the document and they're in the presentation. So I'm going to move on to our overall goals for the plan. At the very top, reduce NOx emissions from mobile sources. That is something we are required to do by the trust. And from the survey results, that was again a number 1 priority for Missouri. Some additional goals that we highlighted based on Survey 1, which we sent to our widest Volkswagen listserv. The top answers that we got were reduce NOx. That was a very common answer. Also, promoting electric vehicles, reducing fuel use, and then targeting areas with air quality concerns. Those were our 4 that came out of the survey, and you'll see those appear here on the list. In addition, we prioritized replacing aging school bus fleets, not necessarily from the survey results, but based on the number of comments we received. Second bullet there, we've got reducing diesel and gasoline fuel consumption. That aligned with our survey results. Upgrading government fleets and upgrading private fleets, both allowed under the consent decree. We did receive quite a few comments on both of those, so we included those as overall goals. Our target areas, areas that currently or historically have not met air quality goals, that was something that came out of survey results and aligns with what Missouri thinks we can do. And those areas tend to line up with the target areas that had the affected Volkswagen vehicles, and we'll show you a map of that. We put promote electric vehicles at the bottom of this list, but it's mostly just because of in the consent decree it was listed as the last category. This is not a prioritization of our overall goals, but this is just a listing. So now that we know what our overall goals are, it's time to look at some numbers, and I know everyone was interested in this table. It's in our executive summary. It's also in the meat of the document in the beneficiary mitigation plan. This is our list of award categories and the list of the funding levels that Missouri is proposing right now in this draft. You'll notice we have 8 categories here, and the consent decree had 10, and I will go through how Missouri, we decided to group some of the categories from the consent decree to make them score better, and it'll be a little bit easier for applicants, we feel. So I'm going to walk down through the list here. There's a bright line. You've got the top 3 categories above kind of a bold line in the middle of the table, and then there's 5 below that, and I'll explain that in just a second. So school buses, we're proposing a funding level of $12 million. Remember, Missouri's total is $41 million. Government trucks is award category number 2. We're proposing to put $6 million towards that project award category. Transit and shuttle buses will be number 3 with $4 million. And then we've got that bright line. The 3 categories above the line, that is our starting amount. That's the amount we're initially putting in those for those award categories. Those numbers could increase if we don't receive enough projects or fund enough projects from the 5 categories below the line. So if we don't receive enough government trucks in that award category, if we don't fund $6 million of non-government trucks, that money would roll up to the 3 categories above. Locomotive and marine, $2 million. Airport and cargo equipment, $2 million. Our DERA option, strong support from our stakeholders to do the DERA option, which means using the Volkswagen funds to provide a match, and that gives us additional federal dollars so we can do more projects. $3 million towards the DERA option, and then electric vehicle charging stations, we're proposing to put in $6 million, which is the full 15% allowed under the consent decree. So this is our final table. We are looking for comments on any of this, so please feel free to give us comments where you see fit. And I'm going to go into detail on how we got to some of these numbers. So I'm going to jump to a chart, and this may look a little familiar too. This came from Survey 2 that was again sent to our Volkswagen listserv. These Survey 2 answers helped us determine where we might want to allocate funds. And you'll notice here on the left, you've got the amount, the funding amount in millions of dollars. And we broke out the question in a way that we thought would align with where Missouri wanted to combine the consent decree categories into funding award categories. So government trucks, and then private trucks as a separate category, school buses, again, showing up as a large amount, and that was reflected in our final table tally. We had broken out shuttle and transit buses, trains and boats. We had already combined those in our survey question. Airport equipment and forklifts, kind of combining those as well. EV charging stations, it looks like a small number there based on just raw survey results, 2.8 million. But keep in mind that in the survey question, you could not answer more than 15%. So with the law of averages, if anyone answered 0, it would automatically bring that number to something less than the full 15% or $6 million. DERA option and undecided, we kind of split the undecided around. So this was a good starting point for us. We also went beyond just looking at the survey results, but we read the comments that were received that are on our public-facing website as well. And we feel like the breakout in amounts that you see in our award categories and funding level table is appropriate at this point. I'm going to jump to our crosswalk. This, again, is in the beneficiary mitigation plan that's on draft. And this is where, on the left-hand side, you'll see the consent decree actions numbered 1 through 10. I've got 2 slides. We'll go through 1 through 5 here. And it lists the Volkswagen eligible mitigation action. And then on the right, in the pink headers, are what we decided to combine things into. Sorry about that. So eligible large trucks in the Volkswagen eligible mitigation actions, we broke up into government and non-government, and those are what we call Category 2 and Category 4. Eligible buses under the consent decree were school and transit and shuttle were all one category, and we decided for Missouri's category on the right, we would divide them up into school buses, call that Category 1, transit and shuttle buses will be a separate pot of money. Freight switchers, ferries and tugs, and ocean-going vessels on the left, you've got Volkswagen called them 3, 4, and 5. We decided to combine them all into one. So locomotive and marine are all going to be called Category 5 for Missouri. And again, this grouping has to do with the ways in which we're going to collect applications, and these are the types of projects that are going to score well against each other. So locomotive and marine being together means they score competitively. I'll jump to the last half of the table. So we see the remaining 6 through 10 on the VW eligible mitigation actions on the left. Medium trucks, just like we did with large trucks, we split those up. On the right-hand side, you'll see Missouri's award category. We did government trucks and non-government trucks. Airport ground support equipment, and forklifts and port cargo handling equipment. The Volkswagen Trust called those 7 and 8. We decided to combine them into one. So airport and cargo equipment, again, scoring similarly. On the right-hand side, we're going to call those Category 6 for Missouri, for our Missouri documents. Light-duty zero-emission vehicle supply equipment, we kind of renamed that electric vehicle charging stations. We did not get a lot of comments saying anyone wanted hydrogen fueling stations in Missouri. That's the other light-duty zero-emission equipment that was possible under the consent decree. We decided to go ahead and change that name to electric vehicle charging stations. We're going to call that Category 8 for Missouri. And the DERA option as well, we're keeping that one the same. So that one remains unchanged. So that goes through the bulk of the document. What everyone wants to see is how much money is going into each pot. So I think I've covered that for you. I'm going to go to item number 3, which is required under the consent decree, is this consideration of benefits for areas of the state with disproportionate air pollution burdens. This one was, we asked some survey questions again about this, and the results came back that we wanted to do a reserving of a minimum portion of the funding within certain pots to say certain areas of the state should get a shot at an amount of that pot. And we'll talk about more of that in the implementations guidelines. A lot of the details of this general heading come in the guidelines. So we're going to reserve some minimum portion of funding for certain areas of the state. We're going to also be able to give award points on applications if you operate in certain areas of the state. And those geographic areas that we're targeting are based on those 4 bullets at the bottom of the page. So we're targeting areas with sensitive populations, people, children, asthmatics, the elderly, people with pre-existing respiratory conditions. Sensitive populations, in one way that we're targeting this is around school buses and the children who are exposed to the diesel emissions at school buses. So area of concentrated diesel emissions is number 2. We considered that and said, you know, ports, heavy-duty freight, shipping areas, those are areas of concentrated diesel emissions. Additionally, we mentioned just the general concentration of emissions from mobile sources in some of our more urbanized areas in the state. So those are, again, target areas. Areas that are not meeting air quality standards, both currently and in the past. So the St. Louis and Kansas City areas are the 2 areas either currently or historically haven't met air quality standards. And then the last bullet is we wanted to target areas with large portions of VW vehicles. Again, these are from survey results, and folks were in favor of doing that, while at the same time not limiting and saying we're not going to give money to any one area of the state. We do have certain categories that are open statewide. Other states that are dealing with their Volkswagen funds have decided to do it a little bit differently and maybe have closed off certain areas of their state. But in Missouri, we do have target areas. We are trying to get money to certain areas, and you'll see that in the implementation guidelines. But this was our way of getting at some of those target areas. This slide, again, from a previous presentation, this is our map of affected Volkswagen vehicles. And this is based on where the vehicles were registered as of 2014. We got this from the Missouri Department of Revenue. And so the areas in red had the highest number of Volkswagen affected vehicles. So that's where we have an indication that some of the excess NOx might have been emitted, although we know that these vehicles traveled around the state and crossed state lines. So this was an indicator for us of where we might want to target some of our areas. Again, the St. Louis area on the east side of the state, Kansas City on the west, those are our historic and current non-attainment areas for air quality. So these lined up pretty well for us. And lastly, our estimated emission reductions. Again, the consent decree requires that we come up with an estimate of our emission reductions, but I want to emphasize we are going to use EPA's diesel emissions quantifier tool to come up with these emission estimates. We have to calculate actual emission reductions for the projects that actually get funded. Right now, we don't know who those are, so in the middle of the slide, we're emphasizing that the actual emission calculations will be based on what your actual vehicle being replaced is, what the engine age is, the fuel type, how many miles you're driving it, and when it's being used. And we're going to compare that to the new vehicle that you're getting, the fuel type you choose, and the new emission rates. We will do that based on the projects that actually get funded. For the next slide I'm going to show you is, and it's in the draft plan as well, we estimated an emission reduction. So we came up with, based on the funding we think we're going to put into these pots, and based on the types of fuels we think people might have, we came up with an estimate of the emission reduction. And again, these are estimates. So on the left-hand side, we've got our lifetime NOx emission reductions, and that's tons. And so the blue column on the left is going to be your excess emissions that were caused by those affected Volkswagen vehicles in Missouri. That is our best estimate. Again, we do not know exactly how many miles every affected Volkswagen drove in Missouri. But this was our best estimate based on the number of vehicles that we had. On the right-hand side in pink is our expected emission reductions. Again, it's a range, so we expect we'll reduce at least 1,200 tons of NOx over the lifetime of these vehicles that are going to be replaced. And it could be as high as 2,000 tons if we fund more lower NOx fuel type vehicles, or if we do more DERA projects that get at some of our heavier duty vehicles. So it's a range right now, but we do think we're going to at least be able to offset the excess emissions that were caused by the Volkswagen vehicles in Missouri. So this estimated emission reductions, again, It's not the actual, so please don't expect us to hit that number exactly, and that's rounding too. So there were decimals and stuff involved. So rounded that to round numbers for you. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I realize we've been about 30 minutes in, and this was kind of our target. We thought we'd take a little break after about half an hour, do maybe a 5-minute break. If anyone has any questions right now on just the plan, and keep in mind we're going to jump into the implementation guidelines after a short break. Any questions? No? No questions? Do you guys want a 5-minute break? Anyone need? Okay. Shelley's ready to go. Okay.
Well, right when you think that we have a really long presentation and everybody's going to be long-winded, it goes fast. So, so since we're moving right along, we'll just keep on going. I'm going to start us off talking about the draft implementation guidelines document. That's the second document that includes the details of how the projects will be implemented. It provides our guiding criteria. And I'm going to go through the selection process and the target areas, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and he's going to talk about the award category details, the timing, and the administrative costs. Okay, the selection process. There are going to be 3 different processes for selecting projects from the 8 different categories. We're going to have competitively scored applications. That's going to be used for government trucks, transit and shuttle buses, non-government trucks, switchers and tugs and ferries, marine, airport and cargo equipment, and then DERA for round 2 and later. Then we're also going to use a lottery style for drawing for school buses and round 1 of DERA. The lottery style, we've been using it for DERA. It works, it's simple and fair. And then the third type of process that we're going to use for the electric vehicle charging station is a department-led team so that we can devise a strategic plan for the placement of the electric vehicle charging stations and make sure that they're getting put in the right place that'll spread it around the state as needed. Okay, so for the competitively scored applications, again, we repeated the award categories on the left there, so you can see what those are as a reminder. And then the selection process, when we're scoring applications, first of all, the vehicles are graded individually. So if you put in for replacing 2 dump trucks, we're going to grade each one individually. The next thing is that 90% of the score relies on the cost reduction per pound over the lifetime of the new vehicle. So it's the cost effectiveness is 90% of the score. And then the remaining 10% of the score depends on where the vehicle operates. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more with the target areas. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that was there. Okay, and now to go into a little more detail on the cost effectiveness, we're going to give some examples of how we would look at cost effectiveness with the main goal of getting the lowest cost of Volkswagen dollars per pound of NOx reduced. So this is a first example of where we would replace a government-owned 2001 Class 8 dump truck. It has a total cost of $140,000. In the first column on the left, you can see that the Volkswagen funds that were requested are $70,000 or $35,000. And then the cost share on one, they're doing 50%, and then on the other, 75%. Well, that comes out even in NOx reduction, but you get the $5.74 per pound on the cost effectiveness. So the second one, the bottom row, would be the one that would be chosen. And the next example, we're replacing a Class 8 dump truck with the total request of $50,000. Here we're going to look at model year. So you can see the middle row where you have the $50,000 request, 2001 truck, a little over 6,000 pounds reduced NOx, and then you come out with $8.21 per pound, and that's the lowest cost and the most cost effective. And then in this example with, again, a 2001 Class 8 dump truck, $50,000 requested, but this one is how much the truck is used. So the fuel used per year is the middle column there in yellow, and then the bottom row is the most effective at $4.30 per pound. Okay, and then this one is where we're going to have the 3 different kinds of fuels and which one is most cost effective. And that would be across the bottom row where you have the all-electric coming in at $7.12 a pound is the most cost-effective replacement. Okay, and then next up is target areas. So for target areas, we're going to do minimum funding reserves and bonus points for these 3 categories. On the left in the bluish box there is government trucks, transit and shuttle buses, and non-government trucks. In the middle column is bonus points only. For those award categories, they're going to be the locomotive and marine, airport and ground cargo equipment, and then DERA rounds 2 through 8. And then the award categories that don't have any target areas would be school buses, round 1 of DERA, and EV charging stations. And then that we're going to have minimum funding reserved. So you can see this is for St. Louis, there's going to be 25% reserved for projects, Kansas City 10%, and 15% for the rest of the state. And then the other 50% is statewide competitive. For the award categories, we're talking about the government trucks, transit and shuttle buses, and non-government trucks that will have the minimum reserves in those areas of the state. And then bonus points for the different areas of the state. So in the St. Louis area, there will be 5 bonus points for St. Louis City and County, 2 bonus points for St. Charles, and then if the vehicle is used outside of that area, it would get negative points for the amount of usage outside of those areas, and that would be so subtracting off, that's what the 10 negative points possible for operating outside of the state. And then for the Kansas City area, there's the 5 bonus points for operating in Jackson County. And then the target area bonus points you can get for operating in St. Louis City and County, 6 points, and then down from there, St. Charles and Jackson County is 5, Jefferson and Franklin counties 4, Clay and Platte 3, and then Boone and Greene counties get 2. And that's all I have.
I think we'll just go ahead and try and keep on going. I think we're moving pretty quick now. So again, I'm Mark Leith. I'm going to go over the award category details, kind of the timing, and also what the implementation guidelines say about administrative costs. Starting with award category number 1, school buses. There's a lot of things going on in this category, and it actually also kind of is very related to DERA because in round one we're going to be doing school bus replacements under the DERA option, which is award category 7. So I got 5 slides on school buses because I just want to really make sure that everybody understands how this is going to work. Starting with the selection process, it's going to be a lottery-style selection process. So every application that we get that's eligible is going to have an equal chance at being picked, and it's just going to be a random drawing to decide which schools are going to be funded. The maximum awards and the cost share percentages, they're going to be different when you're talking about award category 1, depending on whether you're a government-owned fleet or whether you're a non-government-owned fleet. And what we've done here is spelled out for government-owned, it's going to include public school districts and also charter schools. Non-government owned is school bus contractors and then also private and or faith-based schools. Now, school bus contractors, the way that the consent decree works is they would actually be, the state would have the right to consider them government-owned, but we decided that it doesn't really make as much sense to make the school bus contractors have the same cost share as a government-owned, just because a contractor gets a big discount on a bus doesn't necessarily mean that the school that they're serving is necessarily going to benefit as much. They may not actually reduce their transportation costs in any meaningful way. So that's why we're keeping them under the non-government owned. We are taking comments on that. Moving on. As I had mentioned, the DERA round 1 is very much related to award category 1 because in this summer, around July or August, we're going to release an application for this fiscal year 2018 state DERA grant. And the focus of the program is going to be to replace school buses, just like we've done over the last 3 years. Now, when we replace school buses through the DERA grant and use VW trust funds to do it, we then become subject to the DERA terms and conditions. Some of those things include that it doesn't matter if you're government or private, 25% is the most that the grant can fund for the replacement bus. The model year eligibility is a little bit different. We just actually got what the guidelines are going to be for the fiscal year 2018 yesterday, and the model years are going to be 1995 to 2006 are going to be the eligible buses that can be replaced through the DERA program. And like I say, we're hoping to have the application out in the July to August timeframe so that we can start selecting those projects.
What were those dates again?
July to August of this year is the plan.
The bus category, the year.
95 to 2006.
Thank you.
The question was what model year buses will be eligible under the DERA program, 95 to 2006. Thanks. Now, we're allowing for up to 3 buses, for any school bus fleet to request for funding to replace up to 3 buses. We're including a maximum under the DERA program this year of $22,000 per bus. So any particular fleet will be allowed to ask for $66,000. And the way that we're planning to do this is, I think there will be about $500,000 or $600,000 available once we put the VW trust funds in as match for the fiscal year 2018 DERA program. Any applications that we get that are eligible, that $500,000 or $600,000 isn't enough to cover, we're going to use funds from award category number 1, which we've dedicated $12 million to fund all the rest of them. So the idea is that as many possible school buses as we can replace at 25%, that's what we want to do. So that way we get as many buses replaced and spread this money as much as possible before we move into the initial round, which we're thinking is going to start in probably the summer of 2019. And the way that the initial round in 2019 is going to work is we're going to limit you to just 2 buses, and we're only going to focus on the older buses. So 2003 and older is all that's going to be allowed, even though the consent decree allows for up to 2009 and older. The best NOx reductions are for really getting those oldest buses off the street, so that's why we have that. There's going to be 2 different application processes. One that is going to fund close to 50% of the cost of a bus, and it's going to be a lottery selection process. The other, if you're a school that meets the definition of financially disadvantaged, then we're going to offer up to 100% funding for schools, and the award category, the award maximums are much higher for schools that are meeting those. Both will be lottery selection processes if we don't have enough funds in the award category to fund every application. And then there's additional contingency rounds if we don't spend all the money in the 2019 round. This is the contingency rounds here on this slide. So for round 2, it's going to be very similar to the initial round, about that 50% level of funding, and The only difference is going to be that we're going to allow for 2009 and older. So now those newer buses are going to be eligible under the program. The other difference in the round 2 application is we've put a kind of a triangle type swap option going in there. So there'd be 2 application processes. One, if you're a school that would be willing to accept a 2007 to 2009 bus, then and in exchange you'd be willing to scrap like a 2003 or older bus, then you would just put in an application. You're going to get that bus for free, but in order for that to work, the school that's buying the new bus would have to actually be willing to donate their 2007, 8, or 9 model year bus to that school. And the way that would work is we would increase the award. So $5,000 increase maximum award for schools that would be willing to donate. Now, we've had our lawyers looking into this program to see if we would actually be allowed to, and our initial inclination is that we might not be able to. So that might have to come out when we finalize this plan. But you really get the most emission reductions possible when we were to implement a program like that. We might be barred by the consent decree. So we're still looking into that. But that particular element might have to come out in the final plan. And then if there's still funds remaining after round 2, round 3 would go back to just the 2003 and older, but the award amount would increase to close to 75% of the cost of the bus. Future rounds after 3 would alternate between either allowing the newer buses or increasing the award amount even further to getting close to almost 90%. It's doubtful we'll get to those future rounds, but if we do, I think that's what makes award category 1 a good contingency to receive funds is eventually if we're funding near 90% of the cost, the money will get spent. So we won't have any fear of not spending all the Volkswagen dollars. So financially disadvantaged schools, we took a good stab at this. Like I say, in round 1, we have about $1.2 million reserved just for the financially disadvantaged schools, and it's going to cover close to 100% of the cost of a new bus. We've came up with some rules and definitions of what you might need to do in order to meet this criteria. So first is you've got to be a public school district and you have to own the school bus. You're automatically eligible if the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education classifies the district as financially stressed, but there's only a few districts that meet that classification. And then also you're eligible if you meet 3 out of the following 5 criteria. Now these criteria right here, we're really looking for your feedback on. We took an initial stab at this, and I think that our department's probably going to work pretty close with the Missouri Association of Pupil Transportation and possibly the Department of Elementary Secondary Education to make sure that we really get the categories. Our goal is to get at those schools that would not be able to participate without nearly 100% funding. And so what we want to do is come up with objective criteria to qualify. We're not positive that we've hit the mark here, so these are still subject to change. And if you have ideas on what these criteria should be, we would really welcome those comments. And this is the final school bus slide. And it just goes over what those cost share amounts. As I was mentioning, they increase as you go. So the initial round, if you meet that financially disadvantaged, that's the near 100% funding for buses. $90,000 for a new diesel, $100,000 for a new alternative fuel, up to $120,000 for a new all electric. And then for the initial round and round 2, those are going to be the same, right around 50%. Rounds 3 and 4 would be right around 75%, and then rounds 5 and 6, you're up around 90% of the cost of the bus. And for those even categories where if we are able to do it, where you can donate one of your 7, 8, or 9 buses, we would increase that award by $5,000 if you were to do that. Like I said, we may have to pull that in the final plan if the lawyers say that we're barred by the consent decree from doing that. All right, now I've grouped award categories 2, 3, and 4 on the same slide. Shelley went over, how are we going to competitively score applications for the categories that use a competitive scoring process, and she also talked about, ways of treating the target areas where we reserve a minimum amount of funding for certain areas in the state, and then also award bonus points on the competitive scoring application. All 3 of these categories use that selection process and give the same treatment of target areas. The only difference between the 3 is the contingency. So for categories 2 and 3, government trucks and then shuttle and transit buses, the goal is very similar to school buses. We're going to reduce the cost share and initiate multiple application rounds, starting at 50%, getting closer to 75, and then 90 if necessary. For non-government trucks, the way that the contingency, if we don't get enough applications to spend all the funds in that category, would be that we would take the funding, divide it by 3, and then move it up to award categories 1, 2, and 3, so that we could be sure that the money was going to be spent. I've also grouped award categories 5 and 6 on this slide, number 37. That's the locomotive and marine category, also the airport and cargo equipment category. Group these together because both categories, they're going to be competitively scored, and they're both going to have target areas, but we're not reserving a minimum portion of the award category for certain areas of the state. We're just doing the bonus points that are similar to that statewide bonus point system that we have in the guidelines. And the contingency for both is the same. If we don't get enough applications under these categories, our plan would be to divide the funds by 3 and then move them up to fund more projects in award categories 1, 2, and 3. The differences between the two, one thing that's unique about the locomotive and marine category is marine vessels, they're only eligible for repowers. You can't have a vessel replacement. That's from the consent decree. And then for award category number 6, which is the airport ground support equipment and the port cargo equipment, only all electric repowers or replacements are eligible. So you can't have a diesel for diesel or an alternative fuel for diesel. It's got to be all electric in award category number 6. We're getting close to being done with all these award categories. Award category number 7 is the DERA option. And like I say, round 1, we're going to be doing school buses just like we've done in the last 3 years. And we're actually, any unfunded, we're going to fund through award category 1, so those two are kind of related. Just like we've done in the past, if we have not enough funds to fund every application, we'll use a lottery selection process to pick the schools that'll get picked. For contingency, so this year, our DERA grant application is going to be due in June. It will be right around the same time that we're anticipating finalizing this plan. So if we commit to providing the Volkswagen dollars as match and doing a school bus program, we need to ensure that we spend all of our DERA funds by September of 2019. So if we, for some reason, don't get enough applications to even spend the $500,000 or $600,000 in the DERA grant, we're just going to start calling schools and saying, please, we take this money and replace the bus. So additional outreach is the idea. For rounds 2 and later, though, we do have different contingencies, and the whole program itself is going to be different. So we're anticipating probably in the early part of the year, in the January, February part of 2019, we're going to release an application for round 2 of DERA. And then the projects that are going to be eligible are going to be projects that are eligible under DERA, tailpipe retrofits, idle reduction retrofits. There's a whole, there's construction equipment, mining equipment, agricultural equipment that are eligible under DERA, but they can't be eligible under award categories 1 through 6 from the Volkswagen Trust. So it's a way to get at those great projects that were left out of the Volkswagen as an eligible action, but they are eligible under DERA and they do achieve good emission reductions. So we wanted to dedicate the later rounds to just those projects. The way that we're treating target areas is going to be bonus points, but we're not reserving certain amounts of money for St. Louis or Kansas City. It is going to be a competitive application where the bulk of the score is going to be based on how cost effectively you reduce the NOx emissions. If we don't get enough applications in any given year, then we're going to open eligibility to all DERA projects, even if it is eligible under one of the other Volkswagen award categories. And then if that still doesn't result in enough applications for us to use the funding in any given year, we're going to take that money from that year, divide it by 3, and roll it to award categories 1, 2, and 3 so we can do more projects in those categories. And we allocate $3 million to the DERA option, and there's about 9 years left that it's going to be used that are within the 10-year window of the mitigation plan. Our purpose is really just to use the funding in order to qualify for the federal matching bonus. So if we match the original federal award dollar for dollar, we get a 50% bonus from the federal government. Our goal is we're not going to overmatch with the Volkswagen Trust dollars. We're going to do just what we need to get that, because we only get 1 year for each DERA program, and we don't want to put too much money into it. Otherwise, it could limit our ability to get funding for the next year. So it's very likely that there will at least be some money left over in this category to roll to categories 1, 2, and 3. And then finally, award category 8, final award category for Missouri is electric vehicle charging stations. There's two different phases. So the initial phase we anticipate being kind of a 4-year project. The department is going to assemble a team of people who are well versed in electric vehicle charging stations, have an interest in it, have expertise, and we're going to kind of do a strategic plan of where along the highways do we need these charging stations to alleviate range anxiety for would-be electric vehicle purchasers. Once we have that goal, we will then either start selecting the actual areas that the stations will go, maybe if they're publicly owned, or we might develop competitive application processes that are specific only to certain stretches of a highway would you be able to apply. And these are going to be your level 3 fast charge stations. Now, once we achieve the goal that we have, if there's still money left in that category, then we assume by 2022 we'll have either achieved the goal or used those funds. We're going to open it up to workplace and multi-unit dwellings, which are also allowed by the consent decree. Here we'd be looking at level 2 charging stations because these are areas where people would spend more time parked. So it's not going to be as fast of a charge, but still would encourage electric vehicle adoption. What we would do in terms of this, and then the scoring process would be very, very similar. We wouldn't use a team to actually do the scoring process. It'd be based mainly on how many Volkswagen dollars are you asking for per plug that you're going to put at that location. And we will target the metropolitan areas, but for that particular one, we wouldn't have a rest of state set aside for the workplace and multi-unit EV charging stations. And then if there's funding left over after that, we would move it, just like a lot of the other categories, up to categories 1, 2, and 3 to do more projects there. So that's all the details of the award categories. A lot of information that we just went over. I will pause and see if there's any specific questions at this time. If not, I can move on to timing. We covered it all. All right, very good. All right, so the timing. This is part of the...
I have a question.
Sure, there's a question on the phone.
Go ahead. Yes, this has to do with the marine vessel category.
Sure, go ahead.
No, with the marine vessels, if a ferry boat wants to replace the engines in their vessel, is there a minimum age that the engines have to be before they can be considered?
Is there a minimum age? So are you asking, is it got to be older than something or newer than something?
Yeah, correct. Somebody had asked me the question, and they thought that there was a limit that the engines had to be before 2008 or 2009.
I'm taking a look real quick here. That's a good question. You got it. Okay, so yes, only Tier 1 and Tier 2 marine engines are eligible. So if it's a Tier 3 or a Tier 4 engine, then it would not be eligible for repower through the program. That comes directly from the consent decree.
Okay,
So probably the 08 or 09, that sounds about right for when the Tier 3 would have been taking effect and transitioning in. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Oh, we have some more. Please move to the microphone to ask the question.
When you were talking about public charging stations,
Yes.
you said the word public ownership or private ownership. Are you talking about the state would own the charging stations along the highway corridors, or they would be privately owned? And would they be owned by the landowners, individual landowners, or some third-party entity that aggregated to provide stations all along a corridor?
Those are all very good questions, and I believe it could be any of those. What we're going to say is allowed by the consent decree. Our goal is, we're going to have this team that's going to decide where we need them. If there is some publicly owned land, then maybe we will put one there and not have an application process, or maybe we'll decide that we should still have a competition so that we can get the best possible cost. I don't think those decisions have quite been made. I think that once we assemble the team, we will have those details ironed out. But at this point, they're not.
Can I piggyback on that since it's the same topic?
Sure.
So I think the intention, though, is that they're available to the public.
Absolutely.
first
So
round on the
yes,
corridor.
anybody would be allowed to use the station,
Regardless
of who owns it.
Ownership. Okay.
About how many school buses are there in Missouri, and is there a breakdown with the age range, that sort of thing?
Yes, Molly, that's a good question. There's about 12,000 operating school buses in Missouri, and I want to say there's about 6,000 of those buses are 2009 and older, which are allowed for under the CRE. I don't have the exact breakdown past that, but so I don't know exactly how many would fall in the 95 to 06, which is going to be eligible this year, or how many are 3 and older, which will be eligible in 2019.
I would mention that we did provide some school bus information, I believe, at the January meeting. So that is included, and we had to correct some data because we found some better data from one of you at the meeting. But that is corrected on the slides for the January presentation. So you can go to where Emily showed you on the web for past meetings and see a breakdown of the school buses in the state and by age.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and move. Oh, did you have something, Jay?
I have one question. So one thing that I don't think you mentioned is that at least in some of the award categories, there's a maximum amount of trust funds that can
Yes.
be awarded to an individual entity, and I would like to understand why the department included that in the implementation guidelines.
So the purpose for putting the maximum award account, I think, was mainly just we wanted to try and spread these funds around as much as possible and make sure that no single entity were to come in and swallow up a whole award category so that nobody else got any of it. That was the purpose. I think that those are certainly up for comment, and we welcome if there's any reason that you think that it should be, if they're the most cost-effective projects, that's what we should do, and we should allow that for that, then I think we would welcome those comments, and we would consider them for sure.
Clarification on that question. It's not a maximum per entity, how I was reading it. It was a maximum per site. You could, if you had an entity that had a site in Springfield and a site in Columbia, you could do separate awards for each of those sites, and it wasn't aggregated between the two. Is that correct?
That's a very good question. I think it was intended to be entity. So, like, if, let's say, UPS had, stations all across the state, they wouldn't be able to apply at each one of those. However, I don't think it's clarified exactly in the guidelines. I don't think we were quite envisioning that being something that folks would try to do. But one way or another, we will make it clear in the final. I don't know exactly which way we'll land there.
I would just add that, the wording is the maximum amount of VW trust funds that an applicant may request under this award category is, in X dollars. So it says an applicant. So that's why I say entity. I assume they mean applicant. And my comment is, in getting this, is that, I think that's something that we should probably reconsider because it's a disincentive to governments who regionalize services, which provide more efficient services. So.
Appreciate it, Jay. Yes, Steve.
Mark, I just wanted to bounce back to the school buses. The 2 or 3 bus limitation and the kind of healthy maximum award for diesel would seem to be a disincentive to other types of fuels. Are those numbers subject to the public comment period? Would you consider more than 2 or 3 buses as the maximum?
Everything is subject to public comment period. The purpose of putting a maximum limit on the number of buses was to try and make it so that more schools would be able to participate and receive the funding. It wouldn't go majority to any certain school. Wouldn't get.
Right. And I thought that was probably the
else.
reason, but
Yeah.
you've also mentioned that maybe you don't know that you can get rid of all that money. So loosening up the 2 or 3. I'm not a fleet guy by any means, but I know that anecdotally, a lot of fleets, school buses or otherwise, that want to get into alternative fuels look at maybe doing a third of their fleet every year. So in 3 years, they've kind of rolled the whole thing. And 2 or 3 really isn't going to incent anybody except the diesel fleet to access that program, in my opinion.
Okay, I think that's a great comment, and definitely submit it online, Steve, so that we will consider that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say that.
This is Kelly.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, this is Kelly Gilbert in Kansas City, Missouri. I completely agree with that comment, and so I'm glad you made that. I think that was Steve who commented. I think that's a great comment. One other question I wanted to clarify on alternative fuels is the emission factors that you're using for your calculation. You showed a slide that showed, I think, 0.2 for diesel, and maybe it's 0.02, and then 0.1 for propane and a half point for electric vehicles. I assume that you're going to get into some of the other details a little bit later on, but since you called that out on that slide, the DEQ, the diesel emission quantifier that you're using to get your emission data, excuse me, says it equates propane and natural gas to a diesel engine or maybe a gasoline engine for propane. And so I'm kind of wondering how your emission factors are where they come into play, because it doesn't seem to be the case that they are different from diesel and natural gas in the DEQ.
Sure, that's a good question, Kelly. So the way that those emission reductions were calculated on those example slides, it's summarized in the emission guidelines. So we do use the emission quantifier tool to determine how many emission reductions would the older vehicle have emitted if it had continued and not been replaced. So that's part of the equation. We also calculate, all right, what are the emissions from the new vehicle that you're going to purchase? And then for those particular examples, because we used 0.2 is the diesel tailpipe standard, 0.1 would be half of that. So we can calculate what the emissions are for the new vehicle. We cut those in half over a 25-year life of the new vehicle, and that's how we came up with the propane number on that slide. And then for the electric, we cut it by 75%. And so that was the additional emission reduction from that. Does that make sense, Kelly?
Yeah, that's clear. Thank you.
Okay. And I will say that our intention is that the department plans to calculate the emission reductions for all the applications we receive. That's our initial goal, so that folks won't have to actually use these emission quantifiers or run any emission calculations. We will do that so that way we know that it's an apples-to-apples comparison. We'd likely have to verify them anyway, so that should make the application process much simpler and encourage participation. I think I better move on to timing at this point because we're getting a little bit late. So we'll hold all the other questions and comments till the end, please. So starting with the initial application rounds, like I say, the very first application that folks will likely see is the 2018 DERA program. That's going to be midsummer of 2018, probably the July-August. That's number 7 on this slide. Then for award categories 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, we're thinking probably in the September timeframe that we might have those applications out and start accepting applications for those types of projects. And then for electric vehicle charging stations and the original initial round of school buses where you're going to be eligible for that near 50% figure, those wouldn't occur until 2019. For the electric vehicle charging stations, we're going to assemble a team, kind of get our goal and strategic plan in place, then start selecting opening up applications if necessary in probably the summer or fall of next year. As for contingency rounds or planned later application rounds for school buses, because there's up to 6 rounds possible, we're likely going to do those every 1 to 2 years as we step through those different contingencies if there's funding remaining in that category. For government trucks, we were thinking every 2 years we would initiate another application process if there's still funding remaining. Same with the transit and shuttle buses, award category 3. The DERA option, because that's a yearly grant program, we're going to have an application process every single year. We're anticipating we'll do that in the January-February timeframe so that we can have the projects picked before we have to actually submit our work plan to EPA, which is usually due in about early June. And then for the electric vehicle charging stations, like I say, once we develop the highway network goal, we're thinking by 2022 we would open it up to the workplace and multi-unit dwellings and have a competitive application process for those. A few notes about administrative costs. I got 3 slides on this, and then I'm going to pass it back to Darcy to wrap things up. First off, the implementation guidelines we're saying that we're not going to allow fleet owners or third parties to charge or receive Volkswagen funding for administrative costs. It is allowed by the consent decree, but the department decided not to allow these in the draft guidelines because it's going to increase the total amount of administrative costs, and if money is being spent on paperwork and administrative things, we're going to be doing fewer projects and achieve fewer NOx emission reductions. It's going to really increase the incentive for like unqualified project sponsors to try and get people to apply for projects, and that can lead to problems. We're going to have to audit and oversight any third-party administrative costs anyway, so any savings that we get because someone's doing additional paperwork is probably going to be lost because we'll have to audit and oversight that. And then, like I say, if we're paying people for their actual time spent on projects, it's just going to increase the incentive for fraud or waste, and we don't want to do that. We want as many projects as possible, and we want as many dollars as possible going towards projects. So that's why we didn't include those as eligible costs in the guidelines. A couple clarifying points for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. If you are paying a third party for planning, zoning, electrical engineering work, that's necessary in order to actually install the infrastructure safe, legally, and reliably, we're not going to consider that an administrative cost. That's a necessary part of the project. Same with repowers and retrofits. If there's installation labor by a mechanic, that's not administrative cost. That's an eligible project expense as well. And then finally, talking a little bit about the department's administrative costs. So for each project that receives fund, we're going to try and calculate how much funding we think we're going to need just to pay for the time needed to select and oversee the project, track and report the project status on the web page, verify the eligibility of the costs that the fleet owner tells us, and then actually request money from the trustee and give it to the fleet owners. We're going to try and keep these costs as low as we possibly can because our goal is to do as many projects as we can. We're committing, the trust allows you to go up to 15% per project. We're committing that we will not use any more than 10% of Missouri's total allocation. Our goal is to do far less than that. And then I'm going to go ahead and let Darcy wrap things up with the final slides.
All right, well, I've got just a couple slides here just to kind of bring us back and remind us how far we've come, even though we've got a long way to go yet. So this process kicked off back in October. We did have some informal discussions before that, but the trust effective date in October is really what started the process for all the states, tribes, to begin moving through this beneficiary mitigation process. I've been trying to count up in my head how many meetings it was. I think this is meeting number 7. It's 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 that we've been holding meetings throughout November all the way through February, just to kind of start gathering input, really provide the type of information that we'll need in order to develop the plan, which now that you've got it, I hope that you feel that we've taken that information to heart, because I really feel that we do. We proposed that plan just a couple of weeks ago, and if we haven't said it enough, let me remind you, it's a draft plan. They are draft guidelines. We want comment on all of those aspects that we've put in there. We've got the 267 odd pages of comments that we've received. We've got the survey results out there. We've got the input that we've received so far in developing those drafts, but they are still available for comment. I guess just to clearly point out what's not available for comment is the trust document. That consent decree is finalized at the federal level. There's certain things that we can't change at this point, but the draft plan and guidelines are certainly on the table for discussion. So we've got our meeting today. We're holding this meeting in anticipation of receiving a lot of great comments, and the comment period closes on May 4th. Emily reminded you about how to submit comments, and we've got another slide here with a reminder of that address. Assuming everything goes towards our plan here, which we've really been very remarkable at keeping on schedule, I feel, we hope to finalize the plan and guidelines in the June timeframe. And then that would put us on the schedule that Mark described of maybe starting to accept applications in the summer of 2018. But in order to do that, we've got a lot of homework to do. We're going to need your help on that. We need to review and consider the comments that we receive. We need to finalize that plan and guidelines and submit the plan to the trustee. That's very important. We can't even start to ask for money until we've submitted the plan to Wilmington Trust. But we also need to work on all these application forms and instructions. We're going to need your feedback on that as well. We're going to need to do some more work on the website, add those forms and instructions, and as we talked about, we need to be accountable. We need to show you, the applicant, and everybody else in the state where those projects and how those projects are going to be a good use of the money. And then another item we've talked about today is we need to work on assembling that charging station team. All of these things are out there for us to do, and certainly you guys have homework too, and that's to submit your comments and suggestions to us. Again, Friday, May 4th. May the 4th be with us all on that day. Submit your comments. The web portal is really easy to use. You can type in your comments again, or you can upload whatever document you'd like for us to review. We've got a specific list of comments that we'd like to hear, or topics that we'd like to hear back from you on. The amounts in the ward categories, the financially disadvantaged school district information, all of that. We want to hear back from you. We want to make sure that we've hit the mark so that this plan really works for us. The one thing that I always try and remind, and I probably sound like a broken record, but this is the beneficiary mitigation plan can be updated in the future if we figure out that we haven't missed the mark, but certainly our goal is to get it as close to perfect this first round. So your comments are really integral to make sure that we get that. And then my last slide is just a reminder of where all of that information is located. You can go and take a look. If you have any technical problems, let us know. But other than that, I think we're going to... Oh, yeah, and there's a cute little postcard on the back table that you can take to remind you. I took one for myself. I'm going to hang it up because it's just a good reminder of when the comments are due and how you can get to the webpage. It also has a QR code that you can scan, and I was pretty impressed with the technical advancement there. So now we want to hear from you. We've talked. I appreciate, we started taking questions and then we started buzzing back through slides. So if there's a question you have or things you want to mention to the group, let us know. I think we've got one that we've received so far to mention.
Yep, I'm going to jump in real quick. So I would remind anyone on the phone, if you're listening online, turn it down because we're hearing it and there is a delay. Okay, I think that. Thank you.
That's better.
Okay, that's better. I've got a couple things I want to say before we jump into the comments. First of all, we've received questions about this, and we have addressed this at past meetings. In order to be very transparent on these funds, the department chose to go through the appropriations process on our budget